So I recently told someone that I have a very strict anti-selfie policy, and only make very rare exceptions for things like jokes and self-deprecation. This one's a little different. Some of you may have seen rants, in quotes, that I've put in Instagram stories. They've just been screenshots of long Facebook posts that don't really make sense in any way here on Instagram. So this is another one of those things in the wake of the death of George Floyd. To bring people up to speed, a lot of that stuff is focused narrowly on the subject of qualified immunity. If you go to my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/njimenez, so my first initial and my last name, you can find a post where I put all kinds of information about qualified immunity along with a suggested text for a suggested letter that you can send to your Congress people. I sent questions about their positions on qualified immunity to Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, as well as Donna Shalala, who represents me in the U.S. House. So I'm doing this instead of writing it and doing screenshots because, and I keep looking off to the screen, I'm not good at this, and doing screenshots because in this particular case, it's about a bit of a back and forth, and there's to offer context, there's a lot of stuff that you have to include that wouldn't really make sense in the slides of an Instagram story. So let's start with qualified immunity and what that is. I'm not an expert. I am reading directly from the website of the Institute for Justice, which is a nonprofit law firm that litigates to shrink the size and scope of government. So again, reading directly from their website. Chief among these barriers to the enforcement of rights is the doctrine of so-called qualified immunity, which the Supreme Court created in 1982 as a practical barrier to enforcing whole swaths of the Constitution. Under qualified immunity, many lawsuits claiming that a government official violated someone's constitutional rights by, for instance, arresting them for expressing their political opinions or revoking their firearms permit without cause, grind to a halt before they really begin, because with qualified immunity, the normal process of litigation is turned upside down. In a normal court case, a defendant can be held liable if he did something that violated the law. The court's job is to figure out what the defendant did, decide whether what he did was unlawful, and finally, what the consequences would be. That's how it would work if you sued your neighbor for stealing your stuff. Now, imagine your neighbor is a police department, and one day an agent intentionally steals your stuff while executing a search warrant. If you sue, you're likely to lose. Qualified immunity means the question for the court is different. It is not enough for a government official to have violated someone's, meaning your, constitutional rights. Instead, officials can only be held liable if the constitutional rule was, quote, clearly established, unquote. If there was no previous case saying it was illegal for the government agents to steal your stuff, you would be out of luck. Qualified immunity was originally pitched as a way to make sure government officials received fair warning of what they were not allowed to do. The notion of clearly established law has now turned into a kind of perverse game. Unless a plaintiff can point to a court decision saying that doing a specific thing in a specific way violates the law, courts generally apply qualified immunity, and the official is immune from accountability, even if every reasonable person would agree that what the official did was illegal. The official's victims find themselves out of luck. So again, to sort of recap here, what all of that was for a normal human being, if you break the law as the law is written, or at least as the letter of the law is interpreted by the courts, then you are guilty. If you are a government official, not only do you need to have broken the law, but there needs to be precedent of someone having broken the law in exactly that way. Now, that exactly that way is where it gets kind of ridiculous. I'll jump forward. They describe one case where qualified immunity comes into play and then describe another. This one is a little more relevant to what happens in cases of police brutality than the other one they cite. In another court, a panel of judges ruled that police officers who sicked a dog on a suspect who was sitting down with his hands up were entitled to qualified immunity because, while an earlier case had held that officers were not allowed to sick a dog on someone lying down, no case had ever discussed whether they could do so to a suspect who was sitting down with his hands up. You can see easily, this is me talking again, I'll look down when I'm reading, how this would be relevant to the case of George Floyd and other cases of police brutality, of people of any race or whatever. If the courts find that what happened to George Floyd is not exactly close enough to things that have happened in previous cases that have been decided by the Supreme Court or federal appeals courts, it doesn't matter how wrong the cop who killed him was. It doesn't matter how unjustifiable his death was. The case will fail. So, I have been posting infrequently, but at length, about qualified immunity and the idea that maybe this would be a good place for people to focus their efforts. To that end, I sent my Congress people a letter. I will read that letter. It's very short. To whom it may concern, I am writing to find out what information you can provide me on, insert person here, this person's position regarding the legal doctrine of qualified immunity. In particular, I want to know whether the congressperson or senator has a position on whether, why, and under what conditions he or she would vote in favor of legislation to end or curtail the use of that doctrine in federal courts. While there isn't, to my knowledge, a public draft of this legislation yet, any information you can provide on whether the congressperson, whether their view of Justin Amash's plans to introduce a bill in the House to end whether they would vote. Let me read that again. Any information you can provide on the congressperson's view of Justin Amash's plans to introduce a bill in the House to end qualified immunity would be helpful. For what it's worth, I am a constituent who is in favor of doing away with this doctrine/standard. Thanks, Nicolas Antonio Jimenez. I sent this again to Marco Rubio, Donna Shalala, Rick Scott. So far, I have only gotten one response from Donna Shalala. That response is very discouraging. It came entirely too quickly, and it's just a copied and pasted bullshit letter that they have been sending to anybody who's been writing anything even remotely close to relating to the case of George Floyd. Now, note that in what I wrote, I never once mentioned George Floyd. I don't mention police. I don't mention police brutality. Qualified immunity is an issue outside of all of that. But because I mentioned qualified immunity, not unreasonably, they assume that I'm talking about George Floyd, but I didn't say that. Here is what I got from Donna Shalala's office. Dear Mr. Jimenez, thank you for contacting me regarding police brutality and protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. I did not do that. I appreciate you taking the time to write me, and I share your concerns on this issue. I am a co-sponsor of a resolution led by my colleague Representative Presley, condemning police brutality and laying out proposals for reform. I am also taking guidance on any additional legislation from my colleagues on the Congressional Black Caucus. They are our leaders when it comes to ending systematic racism in the United States. But they alone cannot carry the weight of fixing this. We must all continue to work to end racial inequality in this country. George Floyd's murder is a tragedy and a reminder that racism is very much alive in the United States. This murder is only the most recent in the long history of black men and women who have been wrongfully killed at the hands of the police. In the United States today, black men between the ages of 15 and 34 are 10 times more likely than other Americans to be killed by law enforcement officers. In the past few days, we've seen protests against police brutality erupt across the country. People are angry, and they should be. For generations, black and brown people have been promised equal opportunity, respect, humanity, and justice, but they have seen little progress. Our democracy provides the sacred right to criticize our government. I am proud of the hundreds of members of our community that peacefully exercised that right recently. I stand with them, and I am ashamed of the violent handful who have distracted from this historic protest and of the violent rhetoric from President Trump. There is no excuse for the use of force against peaceful protesters or for the military action against our family, friends, and neighbors who have joined these demonstrations. The president's authoritarian use of the military will only lead to more violence against innocent people. We must vigorously and loudly voice our grievances while peacefully and lovingly respecting the safety of our neighbors and communities. The promise of equal justice for black brothers and sisters is long overdue. Black lives matter. We must use peaceful means to realize that promise, not tomorrow, but now. Sorry, she didn't say I said To realize that promise, not tomorrow, but now. Thank you again for contacting me. I welcome your thoughts and look forward to hearing from you in the future. I also encourage you to regularly visit my website at shalala.house.gov, where you can find up-to-date information on my work on behalf of our community and sign up for my e-newsletter. Sincerely, Donna E. Shalala, Member of Congress. Not once did I mention police brutality, George Floyd, the protests, the Congressional Black Caucus, racism, Donald Trump being an authority, none of that. I'm asking about qualified immunity. For all she knows, cops stole some money from my house while they were searching it. She doesn't know. But I get it. She thinks it's about that. She's not wrong. I'm asking in particular because everybody's talking about police brutality, and this was a thing that occurred to me to do that, was easy to do. It's not difficult to write your congresspeople. But it's an utter failure. Within a few minutes, they copied and pasted this thing that they clearly are sending to everybody who even comes within sniffing distance of seeking actual answers on real legislation, real solutions, whatever you think those solutions might be. This is apparently what people are getting. There's no way that somebody actually read what I wrote. No sentient person saw what I wrote and responded with this, much less Donna Shalala, I hope. So here is what I told Donna Shalala's office, because I know she's not reading this. I hope to God this isn't how she's responding to these letters. To whom it may concern, I have a hard time believing, based on the response I got, that anyone in your office spent more than a second looking at the already short note I sent via Donna Shalala's congressional webpage. For your reference, here is that note. I pasted that note. I won't make you hear it again. My original email is deliberately short. I am asking a very specific, narrow question about a very specific, narrow matter, the legal doctrine of qualified immunity, and whether Donna Shalala is in favor of taking legislative action to eliminate or curtail the application of that standard in federal courts. While the George Floyd case was the impetus for my sending the email, my email did not make any reference to police brutality, and I am interested in seeing qualified immunity addressed specifically because it will continue to have an impact on issues that extend beyond police brutality. For purposes of this question, I am not interested in whether Donna Shalala, who I hope had nothing to do with sending me that response, has a relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus, what she thinks about the killing of George Floyd, whether she thinks Donald Trump is an authoritarian, or even whether she thinks Black Lives Matter. I want to know whether Donna Shalala is interested in advancing and or voting for legislation that would end or curtail qualified immunity. I appreciate that your office, again, I refer to your office because I hope Donna Shalala didn't send that response, quote, welcomes my thoughts. Please know that your thoughts on this very specific, very narrow question are being not only welcomed, but demanded by this constituent. Thanks again, I sign it. I think the demand thing was silly. I mean, I can demand whatever I want, but these people clearly don't give a shit. So, the reason I'm putting this up is because, I see a lot of people doing a lot of things on social media, and I think that's a positive good. That's good that people are talking about it, that they're exchanging ideas, that they're expressing themselves about the things that they care about. That's all good stuff. And not everybody is called for this, at the risk of saying it in a very corny way, to more action than that. Sometimes that's good enough. If you have a bunch of people that, they give a shit about what you give a shit about, sometimes making other people give a shit and letting people know that you give a shit is great. That's all positive. However, that is not the job of a congressperson. These are the people who are supposed to be actually grappling with these things in the most practical way. And it took less time to send this response. It took probably about the same amount of time that it took to send this response from Donna Shalala's office than it did to change her Facebook profile picture to that solid black block on Blackout Tuesday. It's fine. I don't have a problem with Blackout Tuesday, but if you're going to be a congressperson blacking out your thing and talking about how much you give a shit about George Floyd, when somebody writes an email, number one, not referencing George Floyd at all, but number two, asking about something very specific, to just lean on all this, Donald Trump is an authoritarian, George Floyd's murder is a tragedy, and basically deferring to the Congressional Black Caucus. Like, would you not have an opinion on qualified immunity? This has been a controversy since the early 80s, when the Supreme Court voted, a majority in the Supreme Court, which by the way included Thurgood Marshall, voted in this case that created the standard. So this is silly. This is insane. And I'm just putting this out there because I actually, just before I started recording this video, I saw an Instagram post from Ed Reed. Ed Reed is, of course, NFL Hall of Fame legend, Ed Reed. Go check out Pancon Podcast's interview with Ed Reed, in which he sort of cautions people to, not be distracted. Go ahead and do the blackout thing, but don't be distracted by people and by organizations or even by yourself when the putting the blackout thing, is sufficient. It's not that. The signaling is good, but when you have evidence that the signaling is empty, as I consider this to be, then there's a problem. I have not gotten responses yet, although I wouldn't expect to because I sent this after business hours from the offices of Marco Rubio and Rick Scott. I don't expect much better than this. However, I will say I'm putting this online, and I happen to know some people in national government. Not like I'm a VIP, but I know some people, whatever. If I got much better than this, it wouldn't shock me to learn that it was because some low-level staffer was tipped off that they should at least write a tailored email. But anyway, that's the thing. Qualified immunity, I think, is important. And if you are assuming that your congresspeople, are taking this to heart because they have blacked out their profile pictures, if you think that they're interested in actually addressing directly any ideas that might be relevant to improving the systems that we all know are flawed, even if we disagree on what those flaws are, then I regret to inform you that you are wrong. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a crazy anarchist person, and I don't believe that. I have no faith in these people, but that's all the more reason to force them, right, even if only by popular pressure, to address these issues directly. I'm taking guidance from the Congressional Black Caucus is not an answer. Justin Amash is introducing this legislation. He's not a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Justin Amash isn't even a member of the Democratic Party. That's not a thing. So, where is the Congressional Black Caucus? Where is Donna Shalala? Where are all of these people? This is not news. It's not new that police have gotten away with things because of this standard. And I think that it would be a net good if people made this an issue. It's at least something to focus this on. It's something to feel like you're demanding answers on. And the last thing I will say is that I don't know how any police officer could articulate a solid argument that standard makes any sense. So every time, if you happen to be in the presence of a sheriff or a police chief or a cop or whatever who's getting one of these photo ops by kneeling with people and marching with people and high-fiving everybody and whatever, maybe say, hey, thanks for kneeling, but also what about qualified immunity? Can you tell me with a straight face that you should continue to be protected by this legal doctrine? And if you can't, will you tell the people in the federal government who represent this district or this state that you are putting your name behind efforts to do away with that standard? Okay, so that is all. I hate that I have recorded this much video of myself. I keep looking at this direction when I should be over here. It's super annoying. I don't like this. But that's it. I'm sure you can imagine, to do an Instagram story with all of this would have taken me all day, and there are better ways to spend that time. And for this, I'm happy to look like an asshole in a selfie video. So that's all. That's it. Again, facebook.com/njimenez. It's not me. Don't add me as a friend if you don't know me. I'm not gonna add you back. But all my posts are public, so you can actually find that with links to a Cato podcast with updates, and I'll also be adding text of any responses that I get from people in Congress. So that's all. Goodbye. Have a nice day, and that's it.